This will be for the con exercise, distance between 2 points. All right, so we have 2 points here, and the first number is always x, and the second number is always y. Okay, so I'm going to label the first point x1, y1, and the second point is going to be x2, y2. So the formula for the distance, representing distance with the letter D, that's going to be the square root, and it's going to be x2 minus x1, quantity squared, plus y2 minus y1, quantity squared. Okay? Now, as a matter of fact, the order that you subtract the x's and y's doesn't really matter, but I'm going to explain that at the end. So we'll just do it the basic way for now. Okay, x2 minus x1, we labeled this x2, so I'm going to do -3 minus -5 in parentheses, -3 minus -5, and that gets squared. And then for y2 minus y1, I'm going to do -8 minus -6. Okay, and that's in parentheses. -8 minus -6. And that gets squared as well. Okay, now whenever you see 2 negatives in a row, you can make it positive. Okay, -3 plus 5 is 2, and that's squared. Again, 2 negatives in a row is positive. -8 plus 6 is -2, and that's squared. Okay, so 2 squared, 2 times 2, that's 4. And -2 times -2 is also 4. And of course, 4 plus 4 is 8. And don't forget, that's still under the square root. So we don't round off for these. It's going to be multiple choice. Okay, and that's your final answer, the square root of 8. Now notice for the negative, I used parentheses, okay? And that is because -2 squared is not the same as -2 parentheses squared. Okay, you want to make sure you have parentheses because this is positive and this is negative. And we always want positive, okay? We're dealing with lengths. So they're always positive. So make sure you use parentheses and get positive numbers under that square root after you square it. Okay, so the answer here is radical 8. So let's look at our choices. All right, scrolling down, we have radical 8. Now, again, I wanted to mention the order that you subtract doesn't really matter, okay? So you can subtract going this way on the x's and then going this way on the y's. It doesn't matter because it's squared, all right? If you do 3 minus 5 and then square it, that's going to be -2 squared. And that's just 4. And if you do 5 minus 3 and square it, that's going to be +2 squared, and that's also 4. So the order you subtract doesn't matter once you square it. And if you want to, you can always put the larger number first. This way, when you subtract, it will always be positive, okay? You don't have to do that, but it might make it a little easier. Anyhow, square root of 8 is the final answer. Okay, in this problem here, they want us to find the length of the line right here, and we have our distance formula. Now, there's another way to look at the distance formula, okay? The little d represents distance, and we have our square root. Now, when you subtract the x's, you can call that the change in x, okay? So this Greek letter, this triangle is a Greek letter delta, Okay, so delta x, or change in x, and you can also write change in y, delta y. All right, so in place of x2 minus x1, I am just going to write delta x, or change in x. And that is squared. And then we add that to the change in y. And that is also squared. Now remember, on a graph, the x-axis is the left-right portion, and the y-axis is the up-down portion. So basically, in order to fill in the numbers here, I am just going to count on the graph. Okay, so we have the square root, and the change in x is going to be the left-right distance. So I'm going to start here, and I'm going to end up right here. Okay, so how many units is this? Well, that's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, the change in x is going to be 6. All right. You don't have to worry about positive or negative. Like we said before, when it's negative and you square it, it's going to be positive anyway. And now we want to do the change in y, the vertical portion. Okay, so counting, this is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 units. Okay, the change in y is just going to be 5. All right, and now we can use these numbers in the equation. The change in x is 6, and that 6 gets squared. And the change in y is 5, and that 5 gets squared. Okay, you really don't need the parentheses because the numbers are positive anyway. All right, so we still have the square root. Make sure you maintain that. 6 squared is 36, plus 5 squared. 5 squared is 25. And 36 plus 25 gives us 61. So make sure you keep the square root, radical 61. Okay, I believe these are multiple choice, so that would be the final answer. All right, and here we go. Answer B, radical 61. So basically, if you can take the square root at the end and get a number without decimals, they'll have an answer for that. But like radical 61, if you did that square root on the calculator, you'll have decimals. So they just left it alone. All right, once again, they want to know the distance between the 2 points. Now, you can get the coordinates if you like, okay, but you really don't need to. We can just do it the same way we did the last problem. Okay, so the distance formula is going to be the square root of delta x, or change in x, squared, plus delta y, or change in y, squared. Okay, and we can just do the distances on the graph. Okay, so the up-down portion, we'll do the left-right portion first. Okay, counting from this point to this point for the change in x, we're going to go right here. Okay, so how many units is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, so the change in x equals 9. All right, again, don't worry about positive or negative. Just keep it positive because you're going to square it anyway. And then the change in the change in y, up, down, 1, 2 units. Change in y is just 2. All right, and now it's easy. We can use our formula. The distance is going to be the square root. Change in x squared is going to be 9 squared. Change in y squared is going to be 2 squared. All right, let's see. 9 times 9 is 81. 2 times 2 is 4. And 81 plus 4, I'll have to write it up here. 81 plus 4 is going to give us 85. But we want to keep that square root symbol. So it's going to be radical 85. I can't take the square root of 85 without getting a decimal. Answer A, radical 85.